In this video, I'll be describing the production of these multi-layer wood strips for furniture construction, and also these ultra-small multi-layer wood strips, commonly known as purfling, for guitars and other musical instruments. The wood inlays for furniture construction are normally 30 to 50 thousandths of an inch thick and consist of thin wood strips of various woods of contrasting colors. They can vary in width from 1/10 of an inch to over an inch. The wood inlays for guitar building, known as purfling, are normally 100 thousandths of an inch thick, but usually only 40 to 80 thousandths of an inch wide. They are quite small and very delicate. These purfling strips usually consist of 2 to 5 thin strips of wood of contrasting colors, with each thin wood strip being 10 to 20 thousandths of an inch thick. The project begins with some solid wood blocks, usually about 2 inches square, about 36 inches long, and these are put on the bandsaw, and thin wood strips are cut off this block of wood to a thickness between 10 and 20 thousandths of an inch. And I use a variety of woods of different colors and contrasts for this project. These thin wood strips are then combined together to produce a laminate strip. This thin wood laminate strip then is put back on the bandsaw once again, and thin wood pieces slice off this once again to produce my purflings and inlay strips. For this project, I need to slice some boards of different types of woods and different contrasts of woods, and these all need to be between 10 and 20 thousandths of an inch thick. I'm actually going to be making some boards 10 thousandths for some of the parts I'm making. Some of them will be 15 thousandths, and some will actually be 20 thousandths of an inch thick. So I begin by following the same procedures I used in the previous video on making the bindings for guitars, using my Accu-Slice system with the Accu-Sled 2 carriage. And I attach my wood, in this case it's a piece of Purple Heart, which is 2 inches wide by about 1 inch thick, and I attach it to my 1.5 inch Sacrificial fence, and it's attached to my carriage with these flat plate clamps. So again, I follow the same procedures used previously. Begin by moving the board so it just touches the bandsaw blade, and then lock it in place with the coarse adjustment knobs. And I am using an 8 teeth per inch blade. This is a 1/2 inch wide by 8 teeth per inch blade. So after my board's been moved back, I advance it 1 full turn for the curve of the blade, and then 1 full turn will cut off a scrap piece of wood. So this first cut is just to give me a nice flat surface, so every subsequent cut will be perfectly parallel to that surface. For viewing purposes, this video is sped up 10 times actual cutting speed. I normally cut very slowly. The slower you cut, the smoother the cuts. Now for this first board, I want a board 20 thousandths of an inch thick. So I release my mag J clamps, 1 full revolution with the curve of the blade, and then 5, 10, 15, 20 thousandths. Lock my mag jigs in place, and then I'll cut the board. The board I'm slicing here is only 20 thousandths of an inch thick. It's so thin that just the heat of the blade cutting through the wood causes the wood to warp away from the main board. So let's measure that, see what we have. It measures right around 19 thousandths. So now to cut a board 10 thousandths, same process. 1 full revolution for the curve of the blade, and then 5, 10 thousandths. And then we have a board 10 thousandths of an inch thick. Perfectly straight, perfectly parallel. So I'll continue cutting this board until it's all gone, and I'll cut some other boards of some other woods such as walnut and Padauk and yellow heart and maple to give me my other boards I need for this project. I'm ready to glue up my thin laminate strips, which were cut on the Accu-Slice system, and each of these strips is 15 thousandths of an inch thick for this board, and I have 5 boards here, so the total thickness here is about 75 thousandths of an inch with 5 laminate layers. And I'll be gluing these up once again using my glue jig system. Now, I've used this glue jig system in the past to make some of these thin laminate boards for various other projects such as segmented bowls and some of my Disney bowl projects. But the same techniques are used for gluing up these thin strips. The glue jig system consists of 2 aluminum angle irons. These angle irons are about 2 inches by 2 inches, And the back angle iron is actually bolted to these rails. And the front angle iron rides on some brass keys that slot right in a slot in these rails. And by riding in a slot, when I clamp these boards together, this rail is not going to rock and twist. And as a result, I'll get perfect boards, perfectly parallel, straight sides. So just an ideal system for gluing up these boards. So once again, I'll be using Titebond 3 glue for this project. And I am using Titebond 3 glue because it's waterproof. There's a possibility these laminate strips will be wet in order to bend them in the future. So let's begin by, first of all, applying some glue. And I'll be putting glue to both surfaces and then putting them in the glue jig. And the one thing I do is I put a piece of wax paper between the two angle irons. And this is just to keep glue off my system. If I didn't put this in there, I'd have glue all over the system and I'd be cleaning it all the time. So after glue's been applied to these strips, I'll put them in this cradle of wax paper, clamp it, and let it dry for a few hours. And I'm using a foam brush to put the glue on with. And I am putting glue on both surfaces. It is important that I thoroughly coat the entire surface of all the boards. And I do put glue on both sides, and I use a foam brush to brush out the glue to make sure it totally covers the surface so there's no bare wood between the pieces of wood. As you can see, these boards are curling a lot. As soon as that glue hits these thin boards, it causes it to start warping and moving on you, so it makes it a little more difficult to handle. After glue has been thoroughly applied to both sides of the boards are combined together, placed inside the cradle wax paper in the glue jig. The boards are then pushed down to make sure that they're thoroughly aligned, and then we proceed to clamp them using the spring clamps. So now I put clamps, and I put clamps continually the whole way down. I like to use these spring clamps, they work pretty well. And I just keep putting them one on top of another, whole way down, and I alternate, one high, one low, just to get more even pressure on the laminate boards. And I'll let that dry for about 3-4 hours. This has been dry for about 3-4 hours now, so let me take the clamps off and we'll take it out of the... Okay, I'll take this over to my edge sander and stand off the excess glue. And we'll see what it looks like. I just took this to the edge sander and I sanded off all the excess glue off the edges and also cut the ends off on the saw. And this is our resulting 5-layer piece. This laminate board has 3 layers of walnut and 2 layers of maple, each 15/1000 of an inch thick. So my next one is the same woods, walnut and maple again, each 15/1000, but this would only be 3 layers. This would be a challenge to cut on the Accu-Slice, so we'll see how it goes. So. Once again, I put the Titebond 3 glue on both sides of the laminate boards, and as you notice, these boards curl up real fast. The boards are only 15/1000 of an inch thick. As a result, that moisture from the glue on one side of the board causes it to warp and curl, and it makes it a little more difficult inserting it into the glue jig because of the curling. When that completes the glue up of the 2 walnut and maple sets, I have some additional boards I'll be gluing up. This next set's a set of Padauk and maple, and this first set is again a set of 5 Padauk and maple, each 15/1000 of an inch thick. And then I have another set, again 5 Padauk and maple, but each of these is only 10/1000 of an inch thick. So this one's going to be about quite a bit thinner than the set of boards, be around 50/1000 of an inch. And then I have some bloodwood and maple, which I'll also be gluing up. In the previous video, I used this glue-up jig with the offset clamps to clamp those laminated boards for the binders for guitar pieces. I'll be using the same jig. This jig was actually developed for slicing boards on the Accu-Slice system, so you can clamp boards without using double-sided tape or glue. But this is a good glue-up jig for clamping boards together, for gluing them up. So what I'm doing here is, first of all, I have a cleat in the bottom here, which I can rest my sacrificial fence again, and then I have my board I'll be gluing to it, and then I can use my offset clamps to clamp it in place, and this keeps this sacrificial fence perpendicular to this board, keeps everything nice and square, so this thing will rest on the bandsaw table as I'm cutting, which will be quite important. So let me start here first of all by putting a small piece of wax paper here first so I don't get glue all over my jig. Then I set my sacrificial fence in place. And I'll put a bead of glue along this edge and then glue it to this sacrificial fence. Wipe the excess glue off the surfaces. And those offset clamps give just enough pressure to get a good mating of the glued surfaces. Making sure everything is nice and flat. Now that's been drying for about an hour. Take that one out. And this next one is my 3 boards. These are 3 boards, 15,000 inch thick. So the total thickness here is around 45,000 of an inch. It's pretty thin. So I'm not sure how that's going to glue. So we'll give it a try and see. You know, I have some concerns about cutting these thin pieces. Is it going to splinter on the bottom? Is it just too thin? Not enough wood there? And 2, will it glue to this board, or do I need to put a backing board on it? I may need to put a small piece of maybe an 1/8 inch thin piece of wood underneath for gluing purposes and also for cutting purposes. So we'll give this a try just by gluing it direct. So I'm going to put a bead of glue on this and we'll see how it works. Just making sure it's square. That should be good. I'm now ready to start cutting some of these inlay strips on the bandsaw. We're starting off with this, it's about a 13 layer board. It's about a 1/4 inch thick, so it's a wider piece. And the wider it is, the easier it's going to be to cut them. As they get thinner, that's where I'm expecting some issues. Because when you get very thin boards, we're talking boards that are 15,000 inch thick. In fact, even one board is 10,000 inch thick. Is that going to split out when it cuts through the bandsaw? And is it going to be so thin that it's going to be too much, flopping around on the bandsaw? I'm not going to cut accurately. So once again, I'm using the Accu-Sled 2 carriage that I used in the same video on the binders for guitar pieces. And it's mounted on my Accu-Slice system, riding on a 5-foot rail. And this carriage is 30 inches long. And my boards that I'm cutting are going to be between 30 and 36 inches long. The bandsaw blade I'm using is a 1/2 inch wide blade, 18 teeth per inch. It's a pretty fine blade. So after I zero my blade, which is just touching the bandsaw blade on the board, then I'm going to turn my index wheel 1 full revolution for the curve of the blade, and then I want to cut a piece of scrap wood off to give me a flat parallel surface, because after I make that first cut, every subsequent cut will be perfectly parallel to that cut. So let's cut off, let's say 50 thousandths of an inch. 1 full revolution should be in. It is very important you cut very slowly when cutting these thin laminate boards to reduce vibration and give you smooth cuts. I've used a lot of inlays over the years making furniture, and most of these inlays that I bought commercially are between 30 and 50 thousandths of an inch thick. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my inlays 50 thousandths of an inch. So I open my mag jig clamps. I need 1 revolution for the curve of the blade, and then 1 full revolution will give me a 50 thousandths inch thick inlay. Lock my mag jigs in place, and I'll go ahead and cut. And there's our first inlay strip, which is 50,000 of an inch thick, perfectly straight and parallel, and no chipping on the edges. It's nice and clean. So that worked out real nice. So let me go ahead and get a couple more of these cut. And I'll be using this probably for some furniture in the future. And that was 12 linear strips cut from that board. These are all exactly 50,000 inches thick, about these are about 30 inches long. Okay, this is my first thinner board. This laminate board is 5 layers. It's red heart and maple. Each layer 15,000 inch thick. So the total thickness of this is 75 thousandths of an inch by about 2 inches wide. So I'll be cutting off pieces. I'm making purflings for guitars on this. So each of these layers will be 100,000 inch thick. So we'll see how this works. It's held on pretty good with the glue onto this sacrificial fence. I think it'll work okay. Just hope it doesn't flop too much and chip out as I'm cutting it through, because this layer is only 15,000 inch thick on the bottom. And just make sure it slides. It's not binding on the table from excess glue or something on the bottom, but it's fine. So once again, the same procedure. I push my board till it touches the bandsaw blade. Lock my coarse adjustment knobs in place. And then it's 1 full revolution for the curve of the blade, and another 50 thousandths to give me a scrap piece. So again, this scrap piece is just to give me a flat surface. Now at the very start of that cut, this board was flapping around quite a bit, so there was a lot of vibration there. So, but after it got like down maybe 3-4 inches, the vibration stopped. So what I'm going to do during the starting point, I have a push stick. I'm just going to push this board down against the table for the start to eliminate that flopping. I want these purfling strips to be 100,000 inch thick. These are for guitar tops. So that'll be 2 revolutions on my index whip. So it's 50 thousandths and 100 thousandths. So these pieces will be 75,000 inch thick by 100,000 inch wide. Okay, that looks pretty good. I saw no splitting out or splintering of the bottom layer. A little bit of a fuzzy on the edge, but just some 220 grit sandpaper. Let me go and actually take that off. See if we get a close up on that. Excuse me, the board is 75 thousandths inch thick that way and 100,000 inch wide that way. It's 3 layers of bloodwood, and then in the middle of that 2 layers of maple. So I'll keep repeating that process. It'll actually be 3 turns. 1 turn for the curve of the blade, and then 2 turns for 100 thousandths. Okay, after I got about halfway through cutting the boards, the vibration went away because the board got smaller, so I didn't have to hold it down at the end anymore. So I did get 11 pieces, and the actual width is 75 thousandths. And the thickness is 100,000 inch thick. So I got 11 of those pieces. No splitting out, a little bit of a fuzzy, with a bandsaw kicked out at the end, but that can be sanded off with some 220 grit sandpaper. And the very last cut, I didn't have enough cut to get another 100,000 inch thick piece, but this piece is again 75 wide by 50 deep. And that's a real small piece of inlay. But again, no splitting out, just a little bit of a fuzzy on the bottom edge. Now this next laminate board is only 3 layers of, again, bloodwood and maple. So the total thickness in this board is 45 thousandths of an inch. That's really thin. So I know I'm going to have vibration on the end starting out. That could be eliminated, I think, just by not making these boards 2 inches wide. I started with boards that are 2 inches wide. If they were 1 inch wide, I think that vibration problem would go away. So that's one issue, just make the board smaller. So we go ahead and attach this to the Accu-Sled 2 and we'll try cutting it. Okay, that is our strip, which is 45 thousandths inch thick by 100 thousandths inch wide. That's really small. No chipping out. Again, just a fuzzy on the bottom edge where the bandsaw blade was going through, but there's some 220 grit sandpaper took care of that. But that is small. I didn't know I could cut anything that small on the bandsaw. Now that is bloodwood, which is a pretty dense wood. I have some other woods I'll be trying later. I have some walnut, which is a little more open grain wood. That might be a problem with the open grain walnut. And I also have some Padauk, which is an open grain wood, so we'll see how that works also. Yeah, I got 10 strips out of that. And again, these are 45 thousandths inch wide by 100 thousandths inch thick. Now I did do one cut. I made this one board only 50 thousandths of an inch thick. So this is 45 by 50. And that is small. And again, the only thing is a little bit of fuzzy on the bottom, but that is perfect. Next, I have 2 laminated boards very similar to the last 2, except I'll be using walnut and maple. So I have a 5-layer maple and walnut, each layer 15 thousandths of an inch thick. And this is the 3-layer walnut and maple with each layer 15 thousandths of an inch thick. So same dimensions as the previous one, just walnut. And walnut is more of an open grain wood. So you can see if this does chip out where the bloodwood did not chip out. And once again, I got 10 pieces out of that, and they came out perfect. No splitting, no chipping out of the bottom layer, even it's only 15 thousandths inch thick. As I said before, the only thing is fuzzies. You can see a bunch of fuzzies here on the end with just some 220 grit sandpaper takes those out, but that is unbelievable. They came out perfect. Again, these are all 5 layers, 15 thousandths a layer, so that's 75 thousandths by 100 thousandths wide. And I did cut one piece 50 thousandths of an inch thick. The overall dimensions on this Purfling strip are 75 thousandths inch wide by 50 thousandths inch thick. This next board is walnut again. It's a 3-layer walnut, 15 thousandths per layer, much like the bloodwood we just ran. And once again, I got 10 pieces out of that board. And again, this is 3 layers, each layer 15 thousandths, so I got 45 thousandths width by 100 thousandths. And again, no chipping, just fuzzies on the bottom, which will stand out with sandpaper. And they came out perfect. Now at the end, I ran one more piece, and this is actually 25 thousandths of an inch thick. So that's 45 thousandths by 25. If you look at this cross line, it's going to break. It's that thin. It's unbelievable you get something that accurate and that small on a bandsaw. This next laminate board is the Padauk and maple. And again, it's the thicker Padauk. Each Padauk layer is 15 thousandths inch thick. So there's 15 thousandths times 3 layers. 3 of them are Padauk and 2 of them are maple. Now in gluing this up, I took extra care to make sure that this laminated board was perfectly perpendicular to the sacrificial fence. That way it'll lay flatter on the table. And that should eliminate vibration. The previous ones which were vibrating is because the board was worked up a little bit, and it might have been a 32nd or 16th an inch off the table, and it was vibrating at the end. When I got closer, to the board, then the vibration stopped. So I think I can cut this one with no vibration. Okay, once again I got 11 strips out of that Padauk. I did sand this one. But again, no chipping at all on that. It's perfect. So that's 75 thousandths in this direction and 100 thousandths in that direction. This is the final board, and it's again Padauk and maple, each layer being about 10,000 inch thick. So that's 5 layers, 3 of Padauk, 2 of maple, each 10,000 inch thick. So that's around 50,000 inch thick total on this board. And I did make a pretty good effort to try and keep this thin board laying flat on the table, so it has very little vibration. It's up maybe 2 or 3 thousandths, but it's pretty close. So once again, I got 11 boards out of that piece. And again, these are about 50 thousandths inch thick by 100 thousandths inch wide. Now the very first 2 I cut off. The very first 2 I got some splitting out on the ends. I don't know if that was a bad glue joint or excessive vibration. But after the first 2 cuts, I slowed down my cutting speed at the very end, and it went away. It may have just been a bad glue joint, but regardless of slowing it down, the cutting speed may have helped too. And again, the last piece I cut on that was 50,000 inch thick, so that's basically 50 by 50. And again, no splitting out, just a little bit of fuzzies on the end. In the first part of this video, I produced a number of inlay strips for making furniture, and these vary between 10 and 15 layers of laminate boards of different contrasting woods. I started out with a laminate board such as this, and then from this I cut my laminate strip, this set here, and then another set here with a different variety of woods. And these are used for some furniture making jewelry boxes, some other projects I've worked on in the past. And then I made a bunch of Purfling strips for guitars using different woods: Padauk, maple, walnut, red heart, and yellow heart. So, and because I was concerned that some of the different woods might react differently, they might chip out, but that worked fine, no issues. When I started this project, I had some reservations. I was expecting some problems to occur because I had never sliced anything this small and this thin on the bandsaw. And I thought it'd have some issues such as excessive vibration of the wood on the bandsaw table, and even chipping out of the layers. Since these layers are so thin, some layers as thin as 10,000 of an inch, I thought they might actually split out on the bandsaw. In retrospect, it exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect it to come out this well. So I was able to produce some finished inlay strips and purfling strips that were precise in dimensions and exhibit no splitting out of these thin layers. I was able to produce purfling strips, some with 5 layers, each layer 15 thousandths of an inch thick, and for a total of 75 thousandths by 100 thousandths of an inch thick, and they came out quite nicely. I also made some purfling strips that were thinner. Some of these strips had 3 layers of wood, and which was 45 thousandths of an inch thick by 100 thousandths of an inch wide. So again, very, very small purfling strips that cut very nicely on the bandsaw. I also cut a few strips that were thinner. These, if you look at them crosswise, they might break on you. They're so small because these are only, in some cases, is 45 thousandths by 50 thousandths of an inch thick. Very, very small purfling strips. But it can be done on a bandsaw, and I didn't think it could be done when I first started this project. I said it exceeded my expectations. If you have any questions or concerns or comments on this video, please drop us an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to talk with you. Details on the Accu-Slice system and the Accu-Sled 2 are listed on our website as described in the description section of this video. And once again, thank you for watching this video.